Chin forced himself to stop for a moment, taking several deep breaths to calm his racing nerves. He knew that rushing blindly would only lead to mistakes, so he paused to carefully think through what his next move should be. Understanding that every decision could matter, he crouched down and began sketching a rough map in the dirt. A small stone marked where they currently stood, an X represented the estimated crash location, and a circle showed the position of their camp. Chin explained to Helen that the amount of food they were carrying would barely be enough for the two of them to safely return to their camp. However, if they chose to detour toward the crash site first, their supplies would run out before they could make it back. After thinking for a moment, the girl suggested a safer plan. She proposed that they return to the camp first, gather more supplies, and only then set out again to search for the plane. Chin shook his head, believing that returning now would waste too much precious time. Instead, he suggested splitting up. He would go ahead alone to search for the crash site while Helen and the panda returned safely to camp. Kay hesitated and voiced his concern about whether the girl could truly make the journey back alone. Helen reacted immediately and sharply, clearly offended. To her, his words sounded like he doubted her strength and abilities. As their discussion faded, night quickly began to fall. Darkness spread across the island, forcing the young people to set up a temporary camp and light a warm fire. Helen gently asked if she could keep the small gray eagle chick with her. She carefully held the tiny bird in her hands and played with it while thinking about what name she should give it. She wanted something special, something meaningful that would truly suit the little creature. The guy casually suggested calling the chick Little Eagle. The suggestion immediately made Helen frown, since she felt the name was far too ordinary and lacked any imagination. Helen firmly reminded him that he already had his own bird companion. This chick, she insisted, belonged only to her. With a proud tone, she added that she absolutely would not allow anyone to give her pet a silly or boring name. The following morning, Helen excitedly told the guy that she had discovered a large amount of sticky resin nearby. Curious, she asked whether it might be useful for them later. Chin smiled at the discovery and explained that it was actually a very lucky find. Pine resin could be used to make torches, which would greatly help them travel safely during the dark hours of night. After making their preparations, the young people finally separated. The guy continued his journey alone, periodically activating his cheetah-like speed ability every hour so he could move much faster and reach the plane crash site as soon as possible. He hoped that maintaining this pace would allow him to arrive before sunset. By midday, he had covered a surprising distance, but soon he noticed something strange, soft, wet ground appearing beneath his feet, even though the weather had remained clear and there had been no rain. Wanting to understand what was happening ahead, he decided to investigate the area. He sent one of the gray eagles flying forward to scout the terrain and report back. As a massive golden eagle soared high into the sky, the young man activated his trainer ability. Through this skill, his senses synchronized with the gray eagle's vision. Soon, images began appearing inside his mind. He could see a huge stretch of water ahead, though it was unclear whether it was a wide river or perhaps a lake. Realizing he had no other option, Chin prepared himself to move closer and examine the obstacle personally. Not long afterward, a thick layer of fog began drifting through the air. Pushing forward carefully, the guy finally arrived at the edge of a vast swamp. He paused to consider the safest way around it. Taking a longer route might slow him down considerably, but it would certainly be far safer than risking the dangers hidden within the swamp. For several hours, Chin searched for a possible path around the swamp, carefully exploring the edges. Unfortunately, every attempt ended in failure. Eventually, he had to admit the truth. There was simply no safe route around the swamp. Continuing to search for one would only waste valuable time. The idea of entering the swamp made him deeply uneasy. Still, he understood that he had no other choice. Despite the risks and hidden dangers, he had to continue moving forward. As he carefully moved ahead, he noticed swarms of mosquitoes buzzing everywhere. Their bites caused unbearable itching, and he knew that scratching too much could easily lead to infection. Determined not to spend the night in such a dangerous place, Chin pushed himself forward before darkness arrived. The stagnant swamp water was a perfect breeding ground for harmful bacteria. If he accidentally got soaked, or worse, swallowed some of the foul water, he could quickly fall ill with a serious infection. At noon, the sun hung directly overhead. Dense tree foliage trapped the heat inside the swamp like a greenhouse, making the air heavy and suffocating. The intense humidity and heat made breathing difficult and navigating through the swamp far more exhausting. While moving through the sticky mud, his attention was suddenly drawn to several strange green vines nearby. They appeared to move slightly, almost as if they were alive in the humid air. A moment later, he realized with shock that those were not vines at all. It was a massive snake camouflaged among the plants, and it suddenly lunged toward him with its jaws wide open. Reacting purely on instinct, Chin moved at the very last second. He swung his bamboo bottle like a weapon and struck the attacking snake just as it tried to bite. Almost instantly, a gray eagle swooped down from the sky to assist him. With impressive speed, it grabbed the snake firmly in its powerful claws. Using the system's encyclopedia, the guy quickly learned that the creature had been a venomous viper, an extremely dangerous snake capable of delivering deadly poison. Its green body perfectly resembled the surrounding vines, which explained how easily it had hidden in the swamp. After struggling through the muddy terrain for some time, he finally stepped onto a patch of relatively firm ground. Letting out a long breath of relief, he realized he could finally use his cheetah agility skill again to speed up his journey. His pace increased noticeably once more. If he could maintain this speed, he believed there was still a chance he might reach the crash site before nightfall. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Before long, the solid ground vanished again beneath his feet, and a deep sense of despair crept into his heart. With growing horror, Chin realized he had stepped into a dangerous quagmire. The swamp's surface looked harmless, covered with bright green grass and moss, but underneath it was an unstable trap capable of swallowing anything. The ground slowly began pulling him downward, behaving much like quicksand in the desert. The more he struggled, the faster he sank. Realizing this, he forced himself to stay perfectly still and carefully limited his movements. Thinking quickly, the boy ordered the gray eagle to search for a long stick that could help him escape this deadly trap. At that moment, he could only hope his loyal companion would succeed. Chin believed he still had a small window of time before the swamp swallowed him completely. If everything went well, the eagle's help and his own skills might allow him to survive. After a short while, a massive golden eagle flew toward him and dropped a sturdy stick nearby. The boy quickly asked the eagle to bring even longer branches. He knew that building a wider, stronger structure would greatly increase his chances of escaping. Remembering that quagmires behave as non-Newtonian fluids, he began tying the sticks together into a makeshift frame. Slowly, he assembled something resembling a rough ladder. He kept his movements extremely gentle because the quagmire acted like solid ground when undisturbed, but sudden pressure would cause it to liquefy again. Using careful, controlled motions, he began climbing onto the ladder. By spreading his weight gradually, he allowed the surface beneath him to stiffen enough to support him. With enormous effort, Chin managed to lift himself higher until his body was supported by the improvised structure instead of the deadly mud beneath. Moving with extreme caution, he slowly shifted his weight and carefully crawled toward the nearest patch of solid land. Finally free from the quagmire, the boy realized just how much strength the struggle had drained from him. Nearly an entire day had passed, yet he was still far away from the crash site. Suddenly, he remembered a scene from a television series called Condor Heroes, where a villain once escaped quicksand using a clever trick. The memory sparked a new idea and filled him with a bit of hope. Chin decided to select 8 of the driest and strongest poles from the structure he had built, carefully choosing the ones that would provide the best stability for whatever plan he intended next. After studying the poles carefully, he begins tying them together with deliberate patience, arranging them into a shape that resembles a pair of wide skis. The idea is simple but clever. By spreading his weight across a larger surface area, the structure should keep him from sinking too deeply into the treacherous swamp beneath his feet. Using a length of rope, he secures the makeshift skis tightly to his legs, pulling each knot firm to make sure nothing loosens. Before moving forward, he carefully tests the structure, shifting his weight slightly while hoping it will support him and not collapse at the worst possible moment. Thanks to the wider base and the more balanced distribution of his weight, He finally feels the structure begin to glide slowly across the unstable surface. It doesn't move quickly, but it works well enough to allow him to slide forward little by little over the dangerous quagmire. After struggling for several exhausting hours through the swamp, he notices something encouraging ahead. The muddy terrain gradually begins to thin out, and in the distance he finally spots the area where the plane must have crashed. The aircraft clearly suffered severe damage during its rough landing. Parts of the wings are bent and the body is scarred. Yet incredibly, the pilot appears to have survived and remains inside the cockpit. Inside the cockpit, the young female pilot slowly regains consciousness. A sharp pain pulses through her head, and she struggles to focus as she tries to understand where she is and what exactly has happened. The last clear memory she has is flying straight into a violent storm. Soon after, the aircraft lost stability, throwing her into terrifying turbulence before she ultimately lost control and crashed. Despite the chaos, she silently thanks the heavens for one thing. Somehow she managed to guide the plane to the ground before it completely spun out of control. Examining the damaged engine more closely, the girl quickly realizes that repairing it here in the wilderness is almost impossible. The equipment and tools needed simply aren't available. As she looks around the strange landscape, she suddenly remembers seeing a similar swamp years ago while traveling through South America. That memory helps her guess where she might be. Even though it seems unlikely that anyone lives in such a remote place, she still begins shouting loudly for help, hoping someone, anyone, might hear her. After a few moments, she stops herself and sighs in frustration. Screaming into the wilderness suddenly feels pointless. It's hard to believe anyone could be nearby in such an isolated region, and she decides she shouldn't waste precious energy. Taking several slow breaths, she forces herself to calm down and think clearly. Even in this dangerous situation, she tries to stay composed, noticing that the sun is already lowering toward the horizon and night will soon arrive. Considering her options, she decides the safest choice is to remain inside the plane's cabin for the night. At least the aircraft provides some shelter and a small measure of protection. Suddenly, the heavy silence around the wreckage is broken by the sound of a human voice calling out. The girl stiffens in shock, trying to figure out who could possibly be nearby. Standing at the edge of the clearing near the crashed aircraft is Chin. He raises his voice and calls out loudly, asking if anyone is still alive or nearby, hoping to find a surviving crew member. He thinks quickly about the situation. Not much time has passed since the crash, and if anyone aboard the plane was injured, there might still be a chance to help them. The young man mentally connects with one of his gray eagles, asking it to scout the area. Through their strange link, the eagle informs him that a large white bird, or something similar, is very close by. Following the golden eagle guiding him overhead, Chin moves quickly and soon reaches the clearing where the wrecked airplane rests. He quietly pushes aside thick bushes and tall grass, carefully scanning the area for any movement or signs that someone from the plane survived. Approaching the aircraft cautiously, he looks inside the cockpit but sees no one sitting there. At the same time, he notices there are no visible traces of blood nearby, which gives him hope that the crew may still be alive. His attention soon shifts to the control panel. Studying it closely, he feels puzzled. The plane looks relatively new, yet the model itself is extremely old and strangely lacks even a basic communication device. Just then, the young man suddenly spins around after hearing a human voice coming from behind him. He sees a girl running toward him as fast as she can. She is shouting urgently in English, her face filled with panic and fear. Terrified, the girl continues yelling in English, desperately telling him to run and save himself. She warns him that crocodiles live in this area. Chin instantly understands why she is so frightened when he sees what is chasing her. A massive group of crocodiles is rushing forward behind her at alarming speed. He quickly realizes that fighting crocodiles directly on land would be extremely dangerous. Their numbers alone make them a deadly threat, so he urgently signals for the girl to climb into the cockpit of the plane as fast as possible. Kin stretches out his arm toward her, reaching forward to help pull her inside more quickly. The girl grabs his hand tightly and leaps toward the cockpit with all her strength. Behind her, she hears the terrifying clatter of snapping crocodile jaws closing just inches away. As she scrambles inside, The female pilot stumbles and crashes awkwardly into the cockpit, accidentally knocking the boy off balance. For a brief moment, Chin feels stunned. He never expected the pilot to be such a beautiful young woman, and the sudden surprise distracts him from the dangers surrounding them. Speaking quickly in English, the pilot tries to warn him that the crocodiles are gathering in even greater numbers and have already surrounded the plane's wreckage. Even though the guy doesn't understand English very well, the meaning is obvious. Huge reptiles now circle the aircraft, slamming their bodies and tails against its metal frame. Chun watches in shock at how aggressive the crocodiles are behaving. They continue attacking the plane relentlessly, making it clear that simply waiting for them to leave may not work. He quickly fires an arrow at the most aggressive crocodile. Unfortunately, his stone-tipped arrows are too weak to pierce through the creature's thick armored skin. Chin quickly understands that the only vulnerable place he can realistically target is the crocodile's eyes. His next shot misses its mark. The arrow strikes the reptile's forehead and bounces off harmlessly, which only enrages the creature further. Chin realizes that aiming for the eyes is far more difficult than he thought. They are small, constantly moving, and incredibly hard to hit. Meanwhile, the crocodiles keep smashing into the plane's hull with powerful blows. It becomes clear that his attacks have barely slowed them and may have only made them more furious. Judging by the damage already being done, he estimates that they might only have about 15 minutes before the enraged reptiles tear the entire plane apart. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Chin activates his virtual system screen. Without the system's help, he knows there is no way he can survive this. He hasn't spent any points for several days, and his balance has grown to more than 12,000. That should be enough to purchase a powerful skill, yet choosing the right one under pressure is incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, the female pilot pulls out a bottle and a lighter, announcing that she intends to burn the crocodiles using the flammable liquid. The guy immediately tries to stop her, shaking his head and signaling that it's a bad idea. He believes the alcohol could be used far more effectively in a smarter plan. Even though Chin doesn't fully understand her English, he gestures clearly, asking her to hand him the lighter instead. After a moment of hesitation, the girl gives him the lighter. Chin feels relieved, believing that his awkward broken English and gestures were enough to prevent wasting the valuable alcohol. Inside the system's virtual store, the guy selects a skill package called Marksman's Blessing. He isn't completely sure what it does, but the name strongly suggests it will improve his accuracy. The system immediately displays a message congratulating him on obtaining the new skill and confirms that it has been successfully activated. However, Chin feels puzzled because nothing seems different. Unlike his cheetah speed ability, this new skill doesn't immediately change his senses or physical state. The female pilot anxiously urges him to hurry. She points at the cockpit entrance, showing that the crocodiles are already trying to climb inside. In rough, broken English, Chin confidently tells her that he will handle the situation and that she should not panic. He speaks calmly, trying to reassure her that everything is still under control. The young man carefully coats the tips of his arrows with a thick layer of resin, making sure every point is covered so the flames will cling to it. With steady hands, he flicks open a lighter and brings the small flame to each arrowhead, igniting them one by one. The resin quickly catches fire, turning the arrows into blazing projectiles meant to burn whatever they strike. He lifts his bow and begins aiming toward the crocodiles lurking nearby. At that moment, he suddenly understands what the new skill called Archer's Blessing actually does. A strange shooter-style interface appears in front of his eyes, almost like something from a video game, displaying multiple floating indicators and pieces of combat data. The interface shows several detailed parameters that immediately catch his attention. There is a scale indicating direction, another meter showing the exact bow draw strength needed, and even indicators measuring wind speed and the ideal shooting angle. With all this information guiding him, aiming suddenly feels far more precise and controlled. Following the instructions displayed in the interface, Chin calmly adjusts every parameter until they reach the optimal values. His breathing slows as he steadies himself, drawing the bowstring back with careful control. Once everything aligns perfectly, he releases the string in a smooth, confident motion. The flaming arrow slices through the air with incredible speed, covering the distance to the nearest crocodile in an instant. It strikes the beast directly in the eye with deadly accuracy. The perfect shot proves just how powerful and reliable his newly gained skill really is. Encouraged by his success, Chin continues using the marksman's blessing skill again and again. Each time he draws his bow, the interface helps guide his aim. Arrow after arrow finds its target, striking the remaining crocodiles. With every successful shot, his confidence grows stronger and his movements become more natural. The female pilot quickly joins the effort, lighting more stone arrows so they can be used as flaming weapons. After igniting them, she hands them over to the young man without hesitation. Even though she is not fighting directly, she supports him however she can to help drive away the dangerous predators. With a series of well-placed and carefully calculated shots, the young man manages to wound more than a dozen of the aggressive reptiles. Several crocodiles retreat with burns and injuries, and their relentless advance slowly weakens. Gradually, the pressure from the pack begins to fade as the creatures start backing away. After some time passes, Chin scans the battlefield around him, breathing heavily from the tense fight. He soon realizes that the danger has finally passed. The remaining crocodiles, now wounded and cautious, decide to abandon the attack and disappear back into the water. The girl, who had already given up on trying to defend the damaged plane, suddenly throws her hands into the air in excitement. She shouts loudly, unable to contain her relief and happiness after surviving the attack. With a wide, grateful smile, she calls Chin her hero and looks at him with sincere admiration. After the tension fades, the female pilot introduces herself to the young man in a friendly tone. She tells him that her name is Jessica, speaking slowly so he can understand. Her voice carries both relief and curiosity about the stranger who saved her. Jessica soon asks if he happens to know Korean or Japanese. She explains that his English is quite difficult for her to understand, and she struggles to catch what he is trying to say. The language barrier becomes obvious as they attempt to communicate. Chin tries asking Jessica if she has a cell phone. Even though his English is broken and limited, Jessica eventually understands what he means. She gently shakes her head and explains that a phone would be useless here anyway, because there is no signal or phone line on the island. Chin sighs quietly to himself, regretting that his English skills are so poor. He realizes how difficult real communication becomes when they cannot properly explain things to each other. Because of this problem, exchanging important information feels almost impossible. Seeing that the young man must be hungry after the intense fight, Jessica takes out a can of food from her supplies. She hands it to him kindly and gestures for him to open it and eat. Her simple gesture makes the situation feel a little more comfortable. She then pulls out a small camping can opener from her bag and skillfully opens the metal can. The lid pops off with a dull sound, revealing the food inside. She even points to it as if to reassure him that it is perfectly safe to eat. The young man carefully studies the expiration date printed on the can. When he reads the numbers, his eyes widen in disbelief. According to the label, the canned food appears to be almost 100 years old, which makes him think there must be some kind of mistake. Jessica notices that he hesitates instead of eating. Curious about his reaction, she looks at him with a puzzled expression and tries to understand what might be bothering him. Her concern is clear as she waits for his response. Using gestures and simple words, she explains that the food inside is stewed meat. She assures him that it is still good and completely edible. With a friendly smile, she encourages him to give it a try. Chien finally decides to taste the stew. To his surprise, the flavor is rich and delicious, far better than he expected. As he eats, he starts thinking that the strange date on the can must simply be wrong, because the food clearly hasn't spoiled at all. While they rest, the young man notices Jessica beginning to yawn repeatedly. Her tired expression reveals just how exhausted she truly is after everything she has gone through. It becomes obvious to him that she desperately needs proper rest. Sheen concludes that wild animals are unlikely to enter the plane's damaged cabin during the night. Because of that, he decides it will be safe enough for them to sleep there. The wrecked aircraft becomes their temporary shelter until morning. Despite being tired, he cannot fall asleep for a long time. Instead, he lies awake and looks up at the brilliant night sky filled with stars. The quiet beauty of the scene calms him, while the faint chirping of insects occasionally breaks the deep silence surrounding them. Morning eventually arrives, and the young man slowly opens his eyes. To his surprise, Jessica is nowhere to be seen inside the cabin. The sudden realization makes him uneasy, and he wonders where she might have gone while he was asleep. A moment later, a girl approaches the airplane cabin from outside. She greets the young man cheerfully and wishes him a good morning. Her relaxed voice immediately eases some of the worry he felt earlier. He notices that she is already preparing something for breakfast. As she searches through her travel bag, he glimpses many useful survival items inside it. Among them are an iron pot, a sturdy metal cup, and several other practical tools for camping. Shauna hands over some dried boar meat and suggests adding it to the water. She explains through gestures that boiling it will create a much richer and more nutritious broth than simply drinking plain boiled water. After finishing the warm and hearty broth together, the two young survivors feel their strength returning. The meal gives them renewed energy after the difficult night. Jessica clearly has many questions, but because the guy only knows a few basic English words, he barely understands what she is trying to explain. Even with the language barrier, Chin manages to draw a rough map on the ground to explain his situation. Through simple sketches and gestures, he shows Jessica that other people are living somewhere else on the island. After realizing this, Jessica happily accepts his invitation to travel to their camp. As they walk together, Jessica suddenly stops in place. Looking up at the sky with alarm, she warns the guy that a massive golden eagle is circling high above them. The sight of such a huge predator immediately fills her with fear. Instead of panicking, Chin raises his head and lets out a loud whistle. The sharp sound echoes across the open area as he deliberately tries to draw the bird's attention toward himself. Jessica reacts with sudden panic when she sees what he is doing. She urgently tells him to hide and find shelter immediately. In her mind, the giant bird could attack them at any moment. Moments later, she is completely shocked when she learns the truth. The golden eagle soaring above them is not a wild predator at all, but a trained bird that actually belongs to Chin. The discovery leaves her speechless with surprise. After walking for a while longer, a thick and heavy fog begins to spread around them. It rolls in quickly, covering the surrounding forest and reducing visibility. The dense mist makes every step forward feel more dangerous and uncertain. Chin quickly realizes that in these conditions, even the gray eagle will not be able to guide or assist them. The fog is simply too dense. He warns Jessica that they must move carefully and pay attention to every step they take. Jessica soon asks him to stop for a moment and rest. Her voice sounds weak as she admits she is starting to feel very tired and dizzy. The two of them sit down on the ground so she can catch her breath before continuing. The girl takes out her metal travel cup and fills it with water. She slowly drinks from it, hoping the fresh water will help restore some of her strength. Meanwhile, Chin looks around uneasily at the thick fog surrounding them. He wonders how such dense mist could suddenly appear in the middle of the day. The strange conditions make it extremely difficult to continue their journey. Suddenly, he hears the sound of something hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Alarmed, he quickly turns toward Jessica to see what happened. To his horror, he sees that she has collapsed onto the grass and is lying there unconscious. Fear and confusion rush through him. Almost immediately, Chin begins to feel strange himself. A wave of weakness spreads through his body, forcing him to grab his head to stay upright. He realizes with growing concern that his strength is fading and that he might also lose consciousness. The young man finally falls to the ground. Just before completely collapsing, he manages to cover his mouth with both hands. In that moment, he realizes that the strange fog must contain some kind of gas that causes people to lose consciousness. Struggling to stay awake, he slowly crawls toward Jessica. In broken English, he tries asking if she is all right while gently shaking her shoulders. Desperately, he attempts to wake her up. After some time, the poisonous fog begins to thin slightly. Chin checks Jessica again and notices that although she is still unconscious, her breathing seems steady. Feeling a bit relieved, he also realizes that his own dizziness is slowly improving. Remembering something important, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out the lighter Jessica had given him earlier. An idea forms in his mind as he decides to use it to test what kind of gas might be surrounding them. Chin lights the lighter and studies the flame carefully. Using the precision of his aiming skill, he then throws the burning lighter toward a nearby hummock of earth. He hopes the reaction will reveal something about the strange fog. The moment the lighter lands in the hummock, a sudden explosion erupts from the ground. The blast startles him, but it also instantly gives him the answer he was searching for. He quickly understands that methane gas must be leaking from the ground in large amounts. The invisible gas is responsible for the fog, and it is also what caused them to feel dizzy and lose consciousness earlier. Thinking carefully, the guy remembers that methane is lighter than normal air. That explains why breathing became easier when they were closer to the ground. Most of the gas had risen higher above them. He hesitates for a moment, knowing that searching through someone else's belongings is not the right thing to do. However, the situation is dangerous and he needs to find something that could help them survive. With no other option, he prepares to look through Jessica's supplies. Chin carefully opens the girl's travel bag and begins searching through it. He hopes to find anything useful that might help them escape this dangerous area filled with methane gas and save both of their lives. Jessica's duffel bag turns out to be packed with an impressive collection of useful survival items. As Chin carefully searches through it, he finds a well-stocked first aid kit, a portable battery, a sturdy metal spoon, and even a compact tent folded neatly at the bottom. Seeing all these supplies gives him a bit of hope, since many of these things could prove extremely valuable if they need to survive the night or set up shelter somewhere safer. The boy opens the first aid kit and quickly scans through the small bottles and packets of medicine inside. However, his confidence fades almost immediately. All the labels are written in English, and his limited understanding of the language makes it nearly impossible for him to figure out what each medication is for or which one could help Jessica. Chin then picks up the portable battery and holds it thoughtfully in his hands. As he studies it, an idea slowly forms in his mind. If he can somehow use the battery to create oxygen, he might be able to save both himself and Jessica from the dangerous gas surrounding them. To make his plan work, he first needs to prepare a container filled with clean water. He decides to use a hollow bamboo stalk nearby as a makeshift vessel. After that, he plans to use a syringe and 4 tubing from the medical kit to build a simple system that could deliver oxygen directly to Jessica. Working quickly but carefully, he connects a piece of pencil lead to the cathode of the battery. Then he attaches tubing to the syringe so it can capture any gas produced. Next, he connects the metal spoon to the anode, forming a complete electrical circuit. Finally, he places both the spoon and the graphite lead inside the bamboo tube filled with water and switches on the battery. As soon as the electricity begins flowing through the water, tiny bubbles start forming inside the bamboo tube. The water is slowly splitting apart in a process called electrolysis. During this reaction, oxygen begins to collect around the cathode, exactly the gas he needs. Chin carefully directs the 4 tube toward Jessica's face so the oxygen can reach her. He holds the tube close to her nose and mouth, hoping that the fresh oxygen will help her breathe better and eventually bring her back to consciousness. After several tense minutes, the girl finally begins to stir. She lets out a faint groan and slowly takes a deeper breath. Seeing her chest rise steadily again fills Chin with relief, because it means his desperate plan has actually worked. Jessica suddenly pushes herself upright, clearly confused and startled. She looks at Chin with wide eyes and quickly asks what happened to her and why she suddenly passed out. The entire situation feels strange and frightening to her. She truly has no idea what caused her condition. Chin does his best to explain the situation in simple words, telling her that they were likely poisoned by methane gas. He gestures around the swampy area, trying to make her understand that large amounts of gas are released here. Chin suggests that they must leave the area immediately if they want to stay alive. Since the oxygen supply is limited, he proposes that they take turns breathing from the tube while they move. They must hurry because the battery powering the oxygen system will not last forever. After carefully observing their surroundings, they both realize that freedom is only a short distance away. If they can push forward just a little longer, they might escape the dangerous clearing. Without wasting another moment, they begin moving as quickly as their weakened bodies allow. Eventually, after a difficult and exhausting struggle, they finally manage to leave the deadly swamp behind. Once they reach safer ground, they stop and lean against nearby trees, breathing heavily as they recover their strength. Jessica coughs several times while catching her breath, still feeling shaken by the experience. With disbelief in her voice, She says she never imagined the jungle could hide such dangerous and deadly places where invisible gas could knock people unconscious. By the time Jessica and Chin finally emerge from the swampy area, the sun is already dropping toward the horizon. The late afternoon light stretches across the forest. Both of them still feel weak from the effects of the biogas, so they decide to find a safe place to rest before continuing the journey back to camp the next day. Meanwhile, back at the camp, Helen suddenly shouts in frustration. She angrily accuses the raccoons of being sneaky little thieves and complains that the clever animals somehow managed to sneak into the kitchen area and steal several freshly caught fish. Looking closely at the storage barrel, Helen quickly realizes that the raccoons took most of their precious supply. Annoyed but determined, she decides to craft a much stronger bamboo lid so the animals cannot break in again and steal their food. Just then, the golden eagle chick begins chirping loudly, flapping its wings and demanding attention. Hearing the noise, Helen walks over and gently tries to calm the little bird. She reassures it that the raccoons didn't take all the fish and that there is still enough food left for its dinner. She feeds the eager chick the remaining pieces of fish and smiles warmly at it. In a gentle voice, she encourages the young eagle to eat well so it can grow strong and healthy. After all, she says, they will need its strength for the many challenges that still lie ahead. Despite keeping busy around camp, Helen cannot stop worrying about Chin. 3 full days have already passed since he left, and he still has not returned. The longer he is gone, the more she begins to fear that something terrible may have happened to him. Finally, Helen makes a firm decision. If Chin does not return by tomorrow, she will leave the camp and go search for him herself. She refuses to sit around waiting any longer. Just then, her thoughts are interrupted when the golden eagle chick suddenly begins flapping its wings excitedly, as if trying to take flight. Curious about the commotion, Helen steps outside the kitchen area and looks up toward the sky. There, she spots a large golden eagle circling above the camp. Instantly, she realizes what that means. Chin must have returned. Only a few seconds later, Chin himself steps out from the dense forest nearby. He waves and greets her with a tired but cheerful smile. The sight of him alive and safe fills Helen with overwhelming relief and happiness. However, Helen quickly notices something else. Chin did not return alone. Standing beside him is a beautiful, unfamiliar woman who smiles politely as she greets Helen. The unexpected sight leaves Helen slightly surprised. With a playful grin, Chin jokes with Helen and asks if she missed him during the 3 days he was gone. He teasingly suggests that she must have been extremely worried about him the entire time. Chin then introduces the stranger, explaining that her name is Jessica and that she is the pilot of the plane that recently crashed. He also admits that she is a foreigner and that his limited English made it very difficult for him to understand her during their journey. Jessica steps forward and politely introduces herself to Helen. To Chin's great shock, she suddenly begins speaking fluent Chinese with ease. Hearing her speak so clearly leaves him staring in complete surprise because he had no idea she knew Chinese. Still stunned, Chin immediately asks her why she never mentioned it before. He points out that if he had known earlier, their entire trip together would have been much easier and far less confusing. Jessica laughs softly and explains the misunderstanding. She says that Chin kept trying to speak to her in English the whole time, so she assumed that English was the language he preferred. She simply had no idea where he was from. Hearing this, Chin realizes how ridiculous the situation was and begins laughing at his own frustration. As night slowly falls over the island, the camp grows quiet. Their tamed animals curl up and fall asleep inside the cave. Meanwhile, the 3 young people sit together, talking long into the night as they exchange stories about everything they have experienced. Chin tells Jessica about how he and Helen ended up stranded on this mysterious island and the many hardships they faced while trying to survive. In return, Jessica explains that she is a paleontologist from the United States who travels around the world studying ancient animals and participating in fossil excavations. She explains that she recently heard exciting news about a newly discovered fossil species found on an island somewhere in the South Pacific. The discovery fascinated her so much that she immediately boarded a plane and flew toward the site to see the fossils with her own eyes. After hearing her story, Chin begins thinking carefully about the routes she described. Combining that with the path their cruise ship once traveled, He believes he can roughly estimate where this mysterious island might be located. Helen confidently adds that sooner or later they will build a boat and escape because their survival skills have grown much stronger. Jessica becomes even more excited when she hears about the strange animals living on the island. She expresses amazement that ancient pandas might still exist here, even though scientists believe they had long gone extinct. She wonders if the island might also hide other unknown creatures waiting to be discovered. Jessica stares at Hampy with bright, fascinated eyes. Watching her intense curiosity, the others jokingly begin to worry that she might be so interested in studying the animal that she would want to dissect it for scientific research. Still overwhelmed with excitement, Jessica declares that discovering animals like these would be an unbelievable scientific breakthrough. In her opinion, it could easily become the greatest discovery of the entire 20th century. Her eyes sparkle with enthusiasm as she imagines the impact of such a find. Helen bursts out laughing at that statement and quickly corrects her. She points out that if such a discovery were made today, it would actually become the greatest discovery of the 21st century, since that is the era they are currently living in. Jessica's response surprises them both. She confidently says that the 21st century is still more than 70 years away. Her words instantly create confusion and raise even more questions in their minds. Trying to explain, Jessica suggests that maybe the two of them are using the Chinese traditional calendar instead of the international one. She believes that might be the reason for the strange misunderstanding about the current year. Her explanation only confuses them even more. Seeing their puzzled reactions, Jessica quickly apologizes. She says she hopes her words did not offend or upset them. She explains that she truly meant no disrespect and was only trying to understand what was going on. Chin begins wondering if Jessica might simply be so obsessed with paleontology that she rarely pays attention to modern history. Her claim about the 20th century sounds completely ridiculous to him. As far as he knows, it is impossible for the current year to belong to that century. Jessica firmly insists that she is completely serious. She assures them that she has not been unconscious long enough to lose track of time. According to her, the current year is 1927. Her statement leaves the two young people completely stunned. They sit there in silence, staring at her in disbelief. None of them know what to say because her words sound impossible and completely unbelievable. Chin begins thinking carefully about everything that has happened. He remembers that Jessica's airplane really did look like an early 20th century model. He also recalls the strange expiration dates on the canned food they found earlier. The coincidences begin to trouble him deeply. Chin finally asks Jessica to answer one important question honestly. Looking directly at her, he asks what year it is according to the AD calendar. Without any hesitation, Jessica calmly repeats that the current year is 1927. Jessica then turns the question back to him. With genuine curiosity, she asks Chin what year he believes it is, hoping his answer might help her understand why they seem so confused. When the two young survivors tell her their answer, Jessica is completely shocked. She cannot understand how they could possibly claim to come from the future. Her mind struggles to process the unbelievable idea. Chin then asks her to describe what happened just before her plane crashed. Jessica remembers taking off from Los Angeles and flying toward the island. However, during the flight, a powerful thunderstorm suddenly formed, and violent winds quickly caused her to lose control of the aircraft. Helen listens carefully and then says something surprising. She explains that before their cruise ship sank and they were stranded on this island, they also encountered an unusually powerful storm out at sea. Shuren slowly shares his theory about the strange events. He suggests that the storm might have been some kind of space-time distortion, similar to the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. According to his idea, the storm may have pulled them through a temporal rift and brought them to this island from different time periods. The young people sit quietly for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The strange conversation about time and history leaves their minds spinning. They begin wondering what year it truly is and whether the island they are standing on belongs to their own time at all. The mystery of space, time, and fate hangs heavily over them. After thinking for a while, Chin finally breaks the silence. He gently suggests that they put these confusing questions aside for now. Right now, he explains, they simply don't have enough information to solve such a complicated mystery. What matters most at the moment is staying alive and focusing on the practical challenges of survival. Jessica, however, cannot stop thinking about everything they have discovered. Her scientific curiosity keeps pushing her mind forward. During their conversation, she becomes especially intrigued when she learns that a massive titanoboa, a giant prehistoric snake, actually lives somewhere on the island. She begins recalling everything she knows about the creature. According to fossil records, Titanoboa once lived in the tropical forest during the Paleocene era, a time when Earth's climate and ecosystems were very different. She speculates that perhaps environmental changes forced the species to evolve or adapt in order to survive in a new world. Helen then adds something important from her own experience. She explains that many of the animals on this island react strongly to heavy rain. She remembers seeing the giant snake emerge from the bamboo thickets during a violent downpour, and she also notes that wild boars become far more aggressive whenever the rain begins pouring heavily. The young survivors recall that during their time on the island, they have already endured 2 extremely dangerous storms. Both downpours brought chaos and tension because the animals behaved much more violently whenever the rain started falling hard. Jessica begins wondering where the Titanoboa hides during dry weather. She suggests that such a massive snake must have some kind of permanent shelter, perhaps a cave, deep burrow, or hidden den. Without rain and humidity, the temperature might not be suitable for such a giant reptile to move around freely. After discussing it further, the group reaches a somewhat comforting conclusion. The giant snake is likely only active and dangerous during heavy rainstorms. Since the weather is currently dry and calm, they believe they should be relatively safe for the moment. Helen then remembers that Chin and Jessica have just returned from a long and exhausting journey through the swamp. Realizing how tired they must be, she suggests that everyone should go to sleep and regain their strength before worrying about anything else. Helen volunteers to stay awake and keep watch through the night to make sure the camp remains safe. While she says this, Jessica studies the 2 young people carefully and suddenly asks, with a curious smile, whether they are actually a couple. The unexpected question immediately makes both Chin and Helen freeze. Their faces quickly turn red with embarrassment. Neither of them seems to know how to respond, and the awkward silence that follows only makes the moment more uncomfortable. Jessica then turns directly to Helen and asks if she has any romantic intentions toward Chin. The bold question clearly catches Helen off guard. Feeling confused and slightly defensive, Helen asks why Jessica would even care about something like that. Without hesitation, Jessica openly says that if Chin is not Helen's boyfriend, then she sees no reason why she and Chin couldn't share a sleeping space together. Her straightforward words shock Helen even more. Jessica smiles calmly and explains that she truly admires Chin. She was impressed by his determination and courage while crossing the dangerous swamp. More than anything, she was amazed by the clever oxygen generator he created to save both of their lives. Chin quickly notices that Helen's mood is changing. Her body language becomes tense, and her expression grows serious. He can clearly feel the tension rising between the 2 girls, which makes him slightly uneasy. Trying to calm the situation, Chin gently tells Jessica that it would be better not to rush into anything. He reminds her that they are all under extreme stress right now, and strong emotions can easily lead to misunderstandings. He suggests that instead of making sudden decisions, they should simply spend more time together and get to know each other properly. Perhaps after a week of living and talking together, they will understand their feelings more clearly. Meanwhile, Helen's irritated expression shows she is far from pleased. Jessica laughs softly and blows Chin a playful kiss in response. She calls him her hero once again and agrees that they can take things slowly. According to her, there is no need to rush when they have plenty of time to understand each other. Remembering that Jessica brought a sleeping bag in her travel pack, Chin quickly decides to use it for the night. This seems like the safest way to avoid any further awkward or embarrassing situations between the 3 of them. He climbs into the sleeping bag and pulls it around himself. Trying to keep things peaceful, he politely wishes both girls a good night. Deep down, he hopes everyone can relax and let the strange tension fade away. Helen quietly watches Chin for a moment. Something about his behavior feels a little strange to her. She cannot quite explain it, but the way he suddenly retreated into the sleeping bag makes her suspicious. Just then, Jessica begins removing her clothes casually, as if it is the most natural thing in the world. Helen immediately becomes confused and asks what exactly she thinks she is doing. Jessica calmly explains that all of her clothes became dirty and uncomfortable during the swamp journey. She says she simply prefers sleeping without them so she can feel cleaner and more relaxed. Helen cannot help but think that American women must be incredibly open-minded. She realizes that Jessica's cultural background is clearly very different from her own, and the difference makes the situation even more awkward. Suddenly, Helen notices something unexpected. Chin, who appeared to be sleeping peacefully, is actually awake. His eyes are slightly open, and he seems to be quietly observing what is happening nearby. The realization makes Helen both irritated and embarrassed. Jessica notices Chin watching and mischievously winks at him from behind Helen. This only makes the situation worse. Helen immediately becomes upset and begins scolding Chin, accusing him of behaving in a disrespectful way. Helen's loud complaints echo through the cave, waking up the animals that had been sleeping peacefully nearby. Still angry, she loudly calls Chin a shameless spy and even accuses him of acting like a pervert. The next morning finally arrives. Chin slowly crawls out of his sleeping bag and stretches his stiff back, trying to shake off the discomfort of the long and awkward night. As he sits up, he immediately notices that Jessica has also just woken up. She smiles and cheerfully greets him, wishing him a pleasant good morning. A moment later, Helen walks into the cave from outside. She announces that the weather today looks wonderful and warm, which should make it a good day for work around the camp. Helen then says she has prepared some fresh meat broth for breakfast and offers some to Chin. However, the tone of her voice clearly carries a hint of lingering annoyance from the night before. She pours only a small amount of broth into Chin's cup, while keeping the meat and most of the portion for herself. The gesture clearly shows that she is still somewhat upset with him. Not wanting to make the situation worse, Chin silently accepts the cup and leaves the cave without arguing. After he steps outside, Jessica turns to Helen and gently asks what exactly Chin did to upset her so much. Jessica quickly figures out what is going on. It is obvious to her that Helen is feeling jealous. Realizing that Helen probably cares about Chin more than she admits, Jessica smiles quietly and decides not to provoke the situation further. Jessica casually mentions that in some traditional Chinese families, people once practiced forms of polygamy. She jokingly suggests that perhaps Helen could keep the larger room for herself if it makes things easier for everyone. She recalls hearing about such customs from an elderly man during one of her trips to China. However, Helen immediately turns away when she hears this suggestion. She firmly refuses to discuss the topic any further and clearly wants to end the conversation. Jessica watches her reaction and realizes that Helen is actually quite shy and sensitive. In her mind, Helen is a kind and sweet girl who simply struggles to express her feelings openly. A little while later, Chin returns to the cave and immediately notices that Helen looks unhappy. Concerned, he walks over and asks her gently what happened and whether there is something he can do to help. Instead of answering calmly, Helen suddenly snaps at him. She loudly declares that she wants the larger room for herself, speaking as if this demand has been bothering her for a long time. Chin quickly begins to suspect that Jessica must have said something earlier that triggered Helen's sudden outburst. The idea makes him sigh quietly in frustration. After everyone finally calms down and gets some rest, the group gathers together again to discuss their future plans. They spend a long time talking and thinking carefully about what to do next. Eventually, they decide to organize their strategy into two clear stages. The first stage of their plan focuses on settling properly on the island. They want to explore the entire area carefully so they can understand the terrain and prepare themselves for any possible dangers. Right now, Chin's survival skills and the help of their trained animals already give them an advantage against wild boars. However, just to be safe, Chin decides they should cut down trees and build a strong wooden fence around the camp to create extra protection. In addition to defensive measures, Chin also wants to capture a few young wild pigs and raise them near the camp. If they succeed, it could provide a reliable and steady food source for the future. Since winter will arrive in only a few months, the group understands that survival could become much harder. Because of this, they plan to explore the island thoroughly and search for useful resources such as iron and copper ore, which could help them craft stronger tools. The second stage of their long-term plan is to eventually build a boat so they can escape the island. However, they know this goal is still far away. If they cannot secure their survival first, building a boat would be meaningless. Jessica then mentions that she brought many supplies with her when she arrived. She invites Chin and Helen to look through her belongings and see which items might be helpful for their survival efforts. From her bag, Jessica pulls out a set of clean clothes and hands them to Helen. She explains that she bought them shortly before her flight, so they are still brand new. She adds with a friendly smile that the clothes include high-quality undergarments that should fit Helen comfortably. Jessica even suggests that Helen try them on to see if they suit her. Meanwhile, Chin feels extremely pleased when he discovers that Jessica brought several excellent iron tools. Compared to the crude homemade tools he previously used, these metal tools are far stronger and far more practical for building, crafting, and surviving on the island. Early the next morning, the boy heads toward the dense bamboo grove. The cool morning air still carries traces of mist as he walks between the tall green stalks. His goal is simple but important: gather strong bamboo that can be used as building material to reinforce the camp and prepare resources for future projects. Before starting his work, Chin stops beside the giant panda and gently pats her thick fur. Speaking in a warm and friendly tone, he tells her that it is time to head back toward the camp. There is still plenty of work waiting for them, and he hopes she will accompany him like always. Using the mysterious trainer's seal, Chin closes his eyes and establishes a sensory connection with the gray eagle soaring above. Through the bird's sharp vision, he scans the bamboo grove and quietly asks the eagle if the area appears safe. The eagle sends back clear images of the surroundings. There are no signs of the enormous snake anywhere among the bamboo. Seeing this, Chin begins to think that Jessica's earlier theory about the creature's behavior might actually be correct. Satisfied that this part of the grove is safe for now, Chin continues deeper into the area. He walks toward a large dung heap nearby because he wants to test an idea that has been forming in his mind since yesterday. Taking out his lighter, the young man ignites a small piece of dry wood. The dung heap has clearly been building up here for years. If his theory is right, the mixture inside could contain materials capable of triggering the chemical reactions he needs. Soon, the flames begin to burn stronger and brighter than expected. Watching carefully, Chin realizes that his suspicion was correct. The soil here contains saltpeter-rich material created from long-term mixtures of manure and limestone deposits. Without wasting time, Chin begins collecting the strange soil into a basket. His goal is to extract potassium nitrate from it, an essential ingredient for creating black powder. If he succeeds, they will finally have a reliable way to defend themselves from dangerous animals. Once the basket is completely full, Chin decides it would be wise to leave quickly. Wild boars often return to this area to rest when the weather grows hot. He has no intention of meeting a herd of aggressive animals while carrying a basket of soil. When the boy returns to the camp, he notices something surprising. While he was away, the girls were busy working. They have already built a large clay bath structure that could be used for washing or various processing tasks. Jessica immediately asks Chin if he managed to find saltpeter in the bamboo grove. With a satisfied smile, he confirms that he did. In fact, he proudly explains that the amount he collected exceeded even his own expectations. Chin begins preparing the soil for processing. Since he does not need assistance yet, he suggests that the girls relax for a while and perhaps take a short walk around the camp to explore and rest. The following day, the real extraction work begins. Chin explains that producing potassium nitrate requires 3 main stages. First, they mix the saltpeter soil with ash in a ratio of 1 part soil to 8 parts ash to improve the efficiency of the chemical reaction. Next, the mixture is spread across a bamboo mat placed over several bamboo trunks. They slowly pour water over the material, allowing the liquid to wash out the potassium nitrate while leaving behind insoluble salts such as calcium and magnesium compounds. To properly leach the nitrates, Chin patiently pours boiling water over the mixture again and again. The hot water flows downward through the soil and collects inside the clay bath below, carrying the dissolved chemicals with it. After many hours of work, the girls begin to look exhausted. Seeing this, Chin thanks them sincerely for their help. He tells them that tomorrow they will complete the purification process, and once that is finished, they can begin making real black powder. Helen listens carefully and then asks an important question. She wonders how exactly they plan to use gunpowder when they don't even have weapons or proper tools for explosives. Kin smiles and tells her to think a little more creatively. His plan is not limited to weapons alone. Proper explosives could be useful for many purposes, from defense to clearing obstacles and even mining resources. Night slowly settles over the camp, and the young people gather around a warm fire. As the flames flicker, they talk about everything that has happened to them. The strange reality of time shifts and unexpected encounters still feels almost unbelievable. Jessica listens in amazement when Chin mentions that Chinese astronauts once flew to the moon. In her memory, China looked very different during her last visit, when many people still wore traditional braids and modern technology barely existed. Curious about her past, Chin asks Jessica how old she is. However, almost immediately after asking, he realizes that this might not be a polite question to ask a woman. Jessica laughs softly and begins recalling her childhood memories. She talks about traveling through China with her father and staying in a massive house that once belonged to a government minister. According to Jessica, her father had been considering opening a business in China. They traveled there to study the labor market and business opportunities, but after a few days he decided the conditions were unsuitable, and they returned home. Listening to her story, the others begin to realize something. Jessica likely comes from an extremely wealthy family. Her ability to travel around the world suddenly makes much more sense. After pouring the water through the saltpeter soil, a thick layer of muddy sediment collects at the bottom of the clay bath. Chin decides to let the mixture sit undisturbed for 3 days so the heavier particles can settle properly. Once the solution is ready, Chin filters it through cloth several times. The purified liquid is then transferred into clay pots, where it will slowly evaporate over heat. The evaporation process is very similar to producing ordinary salt. As the water begins boiling, the liquid thickens noticeably. Soon, heavy crystals begin forming at the bottom of the pot. These are mostly sodium chloride mixed with potassium chloride and sodium nitrates that quickly separate from the solution. Taking advantage of the fact that different salts dissolve differently at varying temperatures, the girls carefully remove the unwanted sodium chloride crystals. They filter the liquid once more until only the pure potassium nitrate solution remains. When the work is finally done, Chin notices that the clay bath is still filled with leftover nitrate-rich water known as brine. Suddenly, he remembers that this liquid could also be used for making tofu, which makes him grin slightly. After hours of non-stop work, the young survivors feel extremely hungry. They decide to pause the project and head off to eat lunch so they can recover their strength before continuing later. Once lunch is finished, they return to the task of preparing ingredients for black powder. Before long, they successfully produce the 3 necessary components: potassium nitrate powder, charcoal powder, and sulfur powder. Using a small measuring spoon, Chin carefully mixes the ingredients in the correct proportions. He stirs slowly and patiently, making sure the powders blend together evenly for the best possible result. Watching closely, Helen asks eagerly whether the black powder is finally ready. Chin looks at her and simply smiles in response. He lights his lighter and says that the only way to know is to test it. Carefully, he lowers the flame toward a small pile of the powder. Instantly, it flashes into a bright burst of fire, proving their success. The girls jump up with excitement, cheering loudly. They laugh and celebrate, proud that their teamwork and effort finally paid off. Kin quickly reminds them not to get carried away. He explains that producing the powder was only the first step. The real challenge will be turning it into a functioning explosive device.